Okay, I'm going to try to make this pretty efficient. In the last video, we really covered most of what we needed to cover. So the only thing we really didn't cover is sculpting and then getting into animation. So, what is sculpting? Well, I'm in sculpt mode right now, but let's go back to draw mode and you'll see that we talked about how you can jump into edit mode to manipulate and fine-tune your character. However, if you're in draw mode, I'm hitting Shift Tab. There's another way to do the same type of thing, which a lot of people favor, which is called sculpting. So it's down here, sculpt mode, and there are a number of sub options, and there's really only two that I generally use. Smooth, which takes your strokes and smooths them out, and if you just do it, you can see sort of intuitively what's going on there. And the other one I really use more often than anything is grab, and grab basically works the same as jumping into edit mode and using the proportional editing tool. So you can essentially massage your character and fine-tune it dynamically, and at any time you can jump back to drawing. And let's go back into sketch mode. So I'm drawing my character, fiddling around with him, and then I say, well, I want to make some changes. It's not quite what I wanted. I jump into sculpt mode, and if I hit the F key, I can hit F and then just drag and then click, and that changes the range of influence of the sculpting tool, which is kind of useful, like so. Alright, you can get very, very large with your range of influence, as you can see, and then you just jump back to draw mode when you're ready to do some drawing. Okay, so the reason my pencil looks different, by the way, is because I had actually switched to the ink drawing. Okay, so now my general advice is that if you're going to animate, I would try to keep my animation in a single layer. I'm actually going to hit the star key so that my sketch layer is soloed. That way I can't accidentally be clicking one of these other layers and drawing into it. If I try, I'll get a warning because it's obviously locked right now. But it's just good policy to sort of get things mapped out in your pencil test, as it were, and then go in and add. Basically, because sometimes it can become difficult to keep keyframes coordinated. I know this is kind of unclear, but the idea is that if, for example, let's just say here I went forward a few frames, so let's just say I'm going to use the sculpting tool to give this guy a smile. Okay, so what I'm going to do is hit the F key, and I want his chin to come down a little bit, and then I'm going to hit the F key again so I can sort of really sculpt this, get it to where I want it to be. Okay, so now if I hit my up and down arrows, I can toggle between these two keyframes. So the point is that once you get into inking and painting, you're creating keyframes on those layers as well, not just all a single layer. And it's kind of hard to explain how and what the circumstances would be, but it's just something to be aware of. Is it can become difficult downstream to keep all those keyframes coordinated because you have multiple layers that each have keyframes that you're trying to keep them in sync. So you'll deal with it when you deal with it, but the point is that you want to avoid that complexity as long as possible. Early in the process, when you're just figuring out what you want your character to look like or how you want them to move, it's probably better to map it out in a single layer. Okay, so having said that, let's talk about animation. The thing about animating in the Blender grease pencil is that everything you work with has this ability to be sculpted and molded. So that's pretty much one of the big reasons why it's a win as far as animating tools goes. Okay, so if I want this guy to start to get ornery here, like so, by simply going to another key, another frame, and starting to either draw or sculpt, it automatically just creates a new keyframe. Okay? Now at any time, if I hit the up arrow, I can go to the previous keyframe and I can fine tune that one. Right? So it's very interactive. You can come over here and turn on the onion skins, and what that does is it gives you the ability to see the previous or the next keyframe. I need to be in the sketch layer. Okay. What I have found generally is you can see up here, to me it creates more confusion than help. So I find it's easier to just toggle back and forth, just jump between keyframes with the up and down arrows to see what's going on and make adjustments that way. Okay. So now let's say you wanted your character to move across the screen. Alright, so in order to accomplish that, let's give the guy a body. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to give this guy a little tiny body. Like that. Okay, one of the things that can become confusing, and frankly it's in any program you use, you're going to deal with this to a greater or lesser extent. When you're dealing with animation, you got a couple choices. Are you going to move the entire object, move, rotate, or scale the entire object, or are you going to change the drawings? Okay, so in other words, let's just say we're going to go here and start the guy moving. Okay, at this frame, okay, actually let's address something else. As you can see, I just added this guy's body, but the later keyframes, the body wasn't there. What do we do about that? So this is actually kind of an important thing we want to learn. What you do is you jump into edit mode, so hit your tab key, alright, and hit control, lasso the points that you want to duplicate, hit control C, and now I'm going to hit the down arrow to go to the next keyframe and just hit control V. Okay. Now this particular case is kind of instructive because you can see that now getting back into draw mode, I need to really erase those strokes in order for him to look correct. So this is a good example of how you want to plan ahead when it comes to animation, because obviously it would have been better to not have to go in and tweak these later keyframes. And probably a big reason to keep in mind why that's important is that it's basically impossible to change it exactly the same way every time. So in other words, I'm going to erase some strokes here and then go to this frame and erase some strokes, but did I do the exact same thing each time? Well, let's look and see. You can see it chattering, so that means no, I did not. Now, is that the end of the world? No. I mean, sometimes that chatter is actually a desirable animation effect. But if it wasn't, then what you probably want to do is go ahead and just delete these strokes, come back here, okay? And the main problem with this process is you do have to jump into edit mode every time. So control C, and then I'm going to go back to the next keyframe and hit control V, and by recopying, you know, I copied to here, modified it, and then recopied. Now at least I know that I've made the two frames the same. Okay, so those are just logistical processes that you're going to go through when you deal with a situation where you've had to change something upstream and then it has to propagate back downstream. Now there are other ways to deal with it. For example, let's what I could have done is I could have said, well, let's treat our layers as, you know, let's split our character into layers. So my layers here are sort of, they're all about the purpose of the layers, you know, sketching, ink lines, fills, shadows, but they don't have to be. So just to give you an idea of the power that's available to you, I'm going to jump back to edit mode, and I'm going to go ahead and just delete this. Actually, what I think I'll do is cut it. Yeah, okay, forget that. Let's just delete these strokes. Go downstream. And by the way, I'm hitting the X key. You can hit delete or X. It's your choice. I tend to favor the X key because that's been a Blender convention for a long, long time. But okay, so what I could do here is add a new layer and say let's make some layers that have less to do with the function of the layer and more to do with the function of the characters in my scene. I'm going to call this bod, and now I'm going to jump into draw mode, and I'm going to draw the body. Okay, so this is the same goofy little body I had before. I'm going to make it real simple. But what you see here now is because the body's on a separate layer and there are no additional keyframes downstream, now that body layer sustains across the animation. Okay, so now I'm gonna actually look here. I haven't done a lot of this in Blender 2.8, but I want to look at the idea of parenting layers. Okay, which is under this thing called relations. How much you use this is just going to depend on your workflow. If you're inclined to do animation the traditional way and everything that moves is a new drawing, then you're really not going to worry about this. Okay. I'm going to get rid of that. Okay, so the way this would work would be something like this. And again, I'm hesitant to show this, but I'll show it really, really fast. This just kind of gives you an example of how Blender's a little different from other programs. So bear with me for about 2 minutes. I'm going to jump into object mode, and what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to add an empty, which is just a generic object that you can't see. And then I'm actually going to hit Shift D to duplicate it. And I'm going to move this empty up to here. And now what I'm going to do, and I don't expect you to remember all this, is I'm going to hit Shift, click. Sorry, that's not what was supposed to happen. I'm going to grab this, Shift, click. And I'm going to hit Control P to parent that to the object. Okay, so what I just did was I created two empties, and I made one the child of the other, so that when I move this one around, the other one moves as well. Okay. Now the reason I did that is because in my grease pencil layers back over here, if I go back here and I make his body is parented to this empty right here, you can see they move together. Okay. Now his head layer can be parented to empty 1. And there's other ways to do this. As you can see, even though I'm in object mode, each of the individual grease pencil layers are available to be dragged around. So what I'm kind of getting at here is there may be a way to actually just parent one layer to the other as opposed to having to use an empty. That would probably be better. The truth is, in Blender 2.8, I don't know how to do that yet. I've never bumped into the need to do that, and so it just hasn't been an issue. But the way this is broken down right now, if I grab this empty, what I want to do is I want to make the head, or I'm sorry, the sketch layer is the child of empty.001, and the body layer should be a child of empty. Okay, that was what I meant to do. So one thing I'm seeing, this might be an idiosyncrasy of Blender 2.8, is the clicking. When I'm clicking here trying to grab these empties, I'm definitely finding it's a little persnickety about whether, like right now I'm clicking repeatedly on this one and it's not grabbing. It's like it's got to be exact or it won't grab it. But anyway, you can see that this is this sort of situation you could have. So I can rotate this, and yet I can also rotate this, and I want to, again, as we saw in the last video, I want to make it so they rotate around their own median points. This way, this empty controls this layer, and this empty, if I could, oh man, if I could click the darn thing, but it doesn't want to be clicked, controls this layer. So my honest opinion is this is a good thing to be aware of, because you may have a situation where you've got a bunch of layers that you need to either animate or move around or do something with, and treat them as a group. Okay? However, generally speaking, because of the difficulties you see me dealing with, and my 2 minutes is about up, I know, you know, I'm not going to go here and get into using this technique unless there's a really good reason. And you can see another good reason is that Blender just died. Okay? So, you know, again, I'm just going to say that the whole idea of getting into object mode and parenting things to empties it's something that's good to be aware of, but it's generally something we're probably going to avoid for the most part. Okay? In doing anime, what I found was that the minute I got away from just drawing, and I'm going to actually show you the other way to animate. Okay, so that was a little bit of a laborious diversion, but and you're probably going to prefer the method I'm going to show next, which is I'm just going to go to a later keyframe, and I've got two options. I can start drawing, which automatically creates a keyframe, and now by hitting the up and down arrows I can do the traditional animating technique of just figuring out my motion, right? So let's do that. However, I could also drop into edit mode and grab things that are going to be difficult to reproduce perfectly and hit Control C, Control V, and oops, we got to hit the O key, turn off proportional editing so that we can now rotate, and I want this to rotate around its median point, which we learned last time. Boom. Okay. So I think what you're generally going to find is that copying and pasting strokes as well as just redrawing is probably going to get you to an interesting and fun result a good bit more efficiently than getting into the mechanics of rigging, which is that's really what I was doing a minute ago with the empties, is I'm rigging my character. And I'm thinking in that instance more like a 3D animator, a CGI person, than I am a cartoonist traditional animator. Both techniques have their place, but I would generally say that if you're all about drawing and cartooning, you probably want to stick to the traditional method, and the Blender grease pencil works just fine for that. As I mentioned earlier, it's probably wisest to map out your animation in a single layer before you get into inking and painting. You almost want to think of ink and paint as being the brickwork that you have to do once the animation's all planned out. I generally think it's better to get it all mapped out first. Now, let's get back to the original question of how do we make our character move across the screen. Well, you want to think in terms of time. So let's say we're going to give him half a second to move across the screen. So that's going to be about 12 frames. So we'll just go, go there. What you would do is you would jump into tab, or you would tab into edit mode and hit the A key to select all. Unless you have more stuff in the drawing, and you need to be more selective about what you're going to grab. But again, that's where it could be useful to create more layers. If you wanted to keep this character's head separate from his body, or you want to keep two characters separate from each other, then by all means add more layers, and then solo the layer that you want to be working with, so that you can't accidentally grab anything but that character. Okay, but the upshot is you would just drag it across the screen like this, and just the act of moving those strokes created a keyframe. Okay, now interestingly enough, if the reason a person would jump into object mode and do it the other way, which is to actually move the whole grease pencil object. Doing this right now, if there were 5 characters in my scene, they would all be moving. Okay, not just this character. Because right now, by being in object mode, that means I've effectively selected everything as a group. Okay, so we're kind of frowning on that technique. The thing is, though, in the realm of animation, if you move things as an object, then Blender will interpolate the intermediate keyframes. Okay, so you might say, well, what the heck does that mean? Well, if I turn this button on that turns on automatic keyframing, then if I hit the G button, okay, and then I'm actually going to move him back this way. So what just happened is Blender created 2 keyframes. Okay, now the character's jumping back only because I have drawings. The actual drawings moved him around, in different positions. But see, what Blender's doing is it's interpolating all the different positions in between. The problem, the reason that gets clunky with Blender is you would have to jump out of grease pencil mode into dope sheet mode to see those keyframes. So I find that becomes very, very cumbersome. So to make this simple, I'm going to step back here and say, let's take these 2 keyframes and just delete them, so it's easier to see what's really going on here. Okay, so now I only have 1 drawing, but yet my character is moving around. How is this possible? Well, it's because what I'm really moving and animating here is the object, and that's what you can see here. You can see, so Blender's interpolating between these 2 keyframes. So the reason I show you that is because you might look at this and go, well, yeah, I want to be able to do that. I want to just create 2 keyframes and have my character, let Blender do all the hard work of figuring all those in-between positions. Okay? Well, okay. Let's get rid of those keyframes and see if there's another way. And there is. If we don't go into object mode and we just stick with the grease pencil, what we can do here in edit mode is, let's go ahead and do what we did before and give it another position. So our character is going to move across the screen. And we say, well, okay, and right about here, I want him to be kind of here, and here I want him to be kind of here. So he kind of bounces across the screen. So there you go. You can just draw all the intermediate keyframe positions. You can also introduce squash and stretch by going, let's hit the O key so proportional editing is on, and hitting the Z key to undo that. G key to go, and going up to this previous keyframe, and right here I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm giving it a little squash and stretch, hitting the A key twice to deselect, and you can see, I'm not saying this is a good animation, but you can see what you can do. Now, so getting back to interpolation, be aware that there is a way to do it, and the way to do it would be right here. You're going to go to your strokes, and you're going to go to interpolate. Okay? This is actually quite useful because I probably should have this mapped to a I should probably have it mapped to a hotkey because it's probably going to come in handy quite often. If we only had these two drawings, we could actually go strokes, interpolate, which is Control-Alt-E. Okay, let's do that. And by the way, you don't want to have your mouse over the timeline. You want to have it over the drawing. So I'm going to hit Control-Alt-E. And what Blender does is it's showing me all of the intermediate positions between my two drawings. And wherever I stop, I can click, and it goes ahead and inserts an extra keyframe in there. You also could interpolate the whole thing. In other words, interpolate the sequence, which is Shift-Control-E. So let's try that. And there, Blender put in all those intermediate keyframes. I don't tend to do that much because the problem you're going to have is you've got full 24 frame per second animation, which for a lot of the stuff that we do, we really don't want that. I mean, we really don't want that. It's too smooth. It's not very cartoony. So I think what you'll find is just for quick and dirty interpolation, it's probably better to just add your own in-betweens. So I'm going to just kind of go here somewhere in the middle and then hit Control-Alt-E and just say, okay, I'm going to put an intermediate keyframe there. Okay, and now if I go ahead and add a little bit of a tweak, I'm hitting the down arrow to go to the next keyframe. A little bit of a lag behind. So you can really fine-tune your character and your animation. Again, I might say, well, I want another key, I want another in-between right here. And Blender makes it very easy to do that. So now when I hit the space bar to play back, okay, now what you're going to say is, well, wait a second, the action's happening too slow, and you're correct. So I'm going to go right here, and I'm going to bring the end of my animation down to only 40 frames-ish, so that it basically plays back and repeats when I hit the spacebar. So now what we do is we say, let's use the B key to box select all of these keyframes. Now, what's kind of interesting is that the Go G key and the S scale key work in the timeline as well. So the Go key lets you move the keyframes around in time, and the scale key, S key, lets you squeeze them closer together. If you wanted them all to move closer to the beginning of your animation, then simply drag the beginning point back to here, and just like this concept of rotating around the cursor, it's kind of the same way in the sense that now they're going to scale toward wherever my start point is. So it's very easy to fine-tune my timing. Okay, so I'm gonna actually make this even more tight. Okay, so it's all happening in about a half a second. That's a little too fast, so I'm going to hit the scale key again, and remember, I need to be back here so that it's being scaled from there a little bit further out. And that looks pretty good. Okay, and now if I want to fine-tune the positioning of the keyframes relative to each other, let's say I want this to all be on 2s. Let me make sure I've got this right. 1, 2, 1, 2. And I want this to be on 2s. So we want to have a rapid in and out, but the period in between, he kind of sits still. So again, I would hit the B key to box select these keys and maybe pull them back away a little bit, and now what we see is boom, 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 boom. And so it's really, really quick and easy to adjust your timing and get things you know, to where you want them to be. Okay, so that's, let's see, yeah, it's been another half hour. So basically we've covered sculpting, animation, and the dope sheet timeline. The whole diversion into going into object mode and parenting with the empties. That's a little ugly. I mean, if you're like me, you're thinking, I'm going to kind of stay away from that one. And there's nothing wrong with that. What I do want to figure out, I don't know how to do at the moment, but I'm going to figure this out. I'm pretty sure that there's a way to take these layers and actually parent them to each other so that you can sort of use some parenting capability. in object mode without necessarily having to add empties and all the rest. But you know, it's one of those things that you'll get to it when you get to it. You know, when you run into a problem that you say, well, golly, how do I solve this? And you realize that, you know, a more complex rig is the solution. You know, when you get to that point, we'll deal with it. But for now, I think that covers it. The sculpting thing, I think, gives you the flexibility to go ahead and you know, modify characters over time, and now you know how to fine-tune the timing too. So anyway, I will call that part 2 of my newbie Blender 2.8 video, and as questions come up, let's get them answered.